can submit their questions via the chat. And one of our community team members will be keeping track of any questions. We have some previously asked questions from when we posed this idea on Instagram and on Facebook. So we'll do some of those as well. But we'll actually start with one of those, and then you guys can submit questions as we go. And yeah, we'll go from there. Any questions so far? You guys can hear me okay, and I'm going to present my screen in a second. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and start with adding your art to a product and making it look realistic. This was asked on, I believe, Facebook or Instagram. So here in front of me on my screen, we have one of the free designer templates that you can download from any of the designer emails that go out twice a month. You'll see them. We have them for Facebook, Twitter, and we also have an animated GIF. So we just added these models to the templates. Before we had products that were just flat lay, but now we have template or models. So the way that you use this is you double click on whichever model you want to use. You can see on this right side in my layers panel, there's 3 different models. I'm going to go ahead and go with this girl, the white shirt. You double click on that. It's a smart object. So basically whatever you edit in this file right now, once you save it, will open up back in this file and the changes will be made. So to make your art realistic, in the templates, we already have like a texture layer that you can add your art in and it will already add texture, and it's that easy. But I'm going to show you how we actually do that. So I'm going to drag in art from one of my favorite artists on the site, Awfully Adorable. So I just drag that in from my downloads. I'm going to resize it by clicking Command T and resizing it to the size of her shirt. That looks about right. And of course you want to put it not too high up, not too low down. About like 2 inches from the collar is usually where the TeePublic prints print. Okay, so that looks fine, but it doesn't really look realistic. So what I do, the quickest way to do this is take your background image and duplicate it. So right click it, duplicate layer, and then put it over your art. Then turn it on hard light. This is where you can turn on all the different ways to layer your layers, basically. But for this, I do hard light. Some designers will do multiply. That works too. I find that hard light's the best. And then I remove all the colors from that image. So I do Command U, and that brings up the hue saturation panel. Remove all the saturation. And then clip it to your art by holding down Alt. And then see in my layers panel, there's a little arrow and square that pops up. That will make it so that this image or this layer is seen all over the page right now. But when you clip it, it automatically just goes to the design. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the levels of this textures layer. You should always name and label your layers. So to do that, I click Command L, and that will bring up the layer or levels. Then I'm just going to adjust the midtone. That's the one in the middle, until it looks kind of more realistic. It looks pretty good. If you bring in the left side, you can bring in more blacks. If you bring in the white, brings in your lighter highlights. But I think that looks pretty good. So you can see the shadows are coming through and the texture of the shirt. Okay, so that already looks pretty good. But you can see where on the folds of her shirt, like it's not really going with the shirt. It kind of looks like it's just laying there flat, which we don't want. So what I'm going to do is rasterize the art layer by right-clicking on it and then click rasterize. And thank you, Chris. It was blending modes is the thing I was trying to think of. So for this, you changed the blending mode to hard light. So now it's rasterized instead of being a smart object. In general, you want to try and only work with smart objects because you can go back to something and edit it without like, permanently making changes. But for this, the stakes are pretty low because you haven't changed much and you can always just drag your art back in. So now I'm going to go to Filter, Liquify, zoom in, and then on the brush tool options, I put it at like 30 or 40 for pressure. And change the size to whatever you want. Density at 50. And then I'm just going to kind of move around the design so that it goes with the folds of the shirt a little more. Maybe like kind of put it out there, tuck it in here. Oops. And then, yeah, just create some make it just look like it's actually laying on fabric and not like a sheet of paper. There we go. That looks pretty good. It's a lot more realistic than just that. Any questions from you guys about what I just did? Not necessarily other AMA questions, but about what I was just working on. Doesn't look like it. Don't be shy. And again, we have these designer ad templates that you can download for free in our designer emails that go out every month. And like I said, we already have a texture layer in that file. So you don't have to go through all these steps. You can just download the templates. But in case you wanted to on a different model, there you go. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen. Let's see. Looks like there's another question. Which colors are best for text on black shirts? I'm going to let Chris answer that because he is our best production designer printer. So let me turn him into a presenter. Chris, did that work? There you go. I'm not sure if your mic is on.
My mic is on.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. So best colors to print on black shirts are really, pretty much anything lighter than black, although really dark colors will sometimes kind of edge into black territory, and even some of our darker shirt colors like asphalt won't really show black or dark text very well. So I would keep everything at more visible than you would think necessary. Like obviously don't print black on black, but I think anything that you can see clearly from a distance should print well. And just be aware that the conversion process from RGB, the RGB files that you upload to printing in CMYK is going to lighten up the black inks a little bit. But you can test that out in Photoshop by changing the color mode and just seeing how it affects the colors that you've used in your design. And you can do that by opening Photoshop. Let me just describe this to you. Image mode, and then you can just do image mode CMYK or any of the other color options that you're comfortable with. But that's it. So just keep things contrasty so they don't really blend into the shirt color too much.
Chris, while you're chatting and on as a presenter, do you want to answer? Someone asked previously, are there guidelines for placement of my design on a tee? Differences between the front and back? Do you want to go ahead and answer that and share your screen and show how to do that?
Yeah. Here. Let me open up a t-shirt.
Chris, while you're setting that up, I'll go ahead and answer. There was one question about how you change the color of a shirt. So I'll go ahead and show that in my, while I have this open.
Okay, I'll just open these up.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the way that I would change the color of this shirt, and is my screen being shared? Can you guys all see Photoshop? Cool. Okay. There are so many different ways to do this. Every designer probably has their own way, but this is how I do it, that I find is the easiest and quickest. So first you gotta select your shirt. I select it with the magnet selection tool, especially if it's your design or whatever you're working on is high contrast. It can pretty easily detect the outlines. And I have that at about 29% contrast. You can see up at the top of my window. And so it's not perfect, but for the sake of this AMA, I'll go quicker. All right. Oh, and you can press when you're using the magnetic lasso tool. If you accidentally go crazy and mess up, you can just click backspace and then it'll take you back to a previous line. That's kind of really handy. Okay, there we go. So now what I do is I create a group. While this is selected, I create a group. You see at the bottom, this little folder, just click that and it'll create a group. And then I put a mask on that group. So what that does is with that selection, you can see on my layers panel over here, everything's black except for the white part of where the shirt was. So what that does is when I create a new layer and put in a color, it only shows up where you masked it. So this is one technique. You can make a new layer, put in whatever color you want and change the blend mode to multiply. So let me put the design on top. So that's one way. It doesn't look super realistic in some places. It depends on the color you're using. For lighter colors, it probably looks okay. But when it gets darker, the shadows get a little weird. So what I also like to do is do what I did with the same thing that I did with the design is I'll take the whole background and duplicate it and put it above the color layer, turn it to hard light, turn it to black and white, and then mess with the levels so that the shadows look more realistic. That's obviously getting crazy, but you just kind of got to mess with it until it looks right. Another thing you can do is within this group where I masked out the t-shirt, you can put a hue saturation layer and click colorize. and then you can change it from there. Fun. Okay. And another quick tip when it comes to changing colors of shirts. So you can see here her hair the color got changed as well, and obviously does not look realistic at all. So what I like to do is I'll select the area where the hair is, like just in a big chunk. I'll copy it, paste it, and then I'll use my magnetic lasso again to, like, on that layer that I just made, go over the hair. You don't have to be too careful about this. And then put a mask on it. And then I go to select and mask. I turn on this, the second brush over here, refine edge, put on a radius of 1, put on smart radius, and then you just click over this. You just click and drag. And it's detecting like the outlines of the hair. So you can do that by hand, but it would take you like a year. This is like kind of a newer feature that works really well on Photoshop that you can use on a lot of stuff aside from just hair. Okay, so then I clicked OK, and you'll see, so that's not amazing. You would definitely want to go in and like fix it up. I would take a brush, like a really tiny brush, and just like kind of draw in hairs basically. But if you have like, not too wispy of hair, big chunk of hair, like it's a really good technique to use. Let me just see if there are any questions. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Chris now. If you want to present your screen, Chris.
Yep. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, so I've got the front shirt over here and the back of the shirt over here. These will show up if you upload a design and then select a front and back design in your shirts. I'm just going to drag in one of the designs that we had at Comic-Con this year. Portrait of Uhura that looks like Roy Lichtenstein did it. And I've got some guides set up that are generally where the boundaries of the printable area of the shirt are when you upload, which is, I think, 12 inches wide, and it starts at 2 inches from the collar. I usually like to not really maximize the space because that will just make the design appear so big on the chest you won't really be able to see all of it. And a lot of people, when they upload, will try to put the design in the middle of the shirt because that's instinctively where you want it. But typically, just keeping it at the 2 inches from the top mark is what's going to show up best on the shirt. It's going to be right centered on the chest. And unless you have like a really short, like a narrow design, like a single line of text on your shirt, then you're going to space it a little lower, just about where the armpits are. And that'll show up right on the chest where you want it. And then drag this over to the back. That doesn't work. I'm going to drag it in over on the back design here. On the back, it's the same. I try to keep it, you can keep it a little bigger than you did on the front, but I would still do it at the 2 inches from the neckline mark where we have it in the uploader. Just because that's where T designs look best when you upload them. And yeah, I think that's it, unless you have more specific questions about placement, then I can answer them.
Cool. Anyone in the chat have any questions for Chris about what he just showed us? I also see a couple questions that are easier to answer from Rick and from Sarchia. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. You asked, I set 4,000 by 4,000, 150 DPI for design files. What are your dimensions? I set it as big as possible because especially if I want to put it on a tapestry, we suggest making them 5,000 by 5,500 at 150 DPI, but I might even do 300 DPI and like even bigger with the pixels. Chris, I don't know if you have any insight about that or suggestions for how big to make a file.
Usually when I'm designing a t-shirt, I will start with, I have a Photoshop template that I use that's 11 inches wide by 14 inches tall and 300 DPI. That gives me a nice big file to work with when I upload that is good for most sizes of the products that we have on the site. It doesn't always reach the biggest art canvases, but I'm not really designing for the large art canvases. I'm designing for t-shirts. So yeah, 11 by 14, 300 DPI is what I do. I think that works out to like 3,300 by 4,500 or something. I don't have a calculator in front of me, but yeah, that's where I start out with, and that's usually good for whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it's basically like if you know you want to upload for a large tapestry, make it bigger than that. If you're only, uploading for a mug or stickers, then it doesn't have to be as big. But we suggest at least 5,000 by 5,500 at 150 DPI. The other question, Rick, that's a good question. Yes, the shirts obviously if you're changing the color of a shirt on a model for ads that you're creating, it should definitely only be what we provide on the site. I actually don't think we have a list of hex codes to offer, but I think that's actually a very good. Oh, we do. Dasha just told me we do. So Dasha, if you can type in the chat where we have that, and what I do though is on my storefront, I'll create a design that just says like test, and then I'll enable every single product and every single color. So when I'm doing an ad with a model in it, or I'm doing a flat lay and changing the color of something, I'll go to my storefront, go to the product I want and the color I want, and then I'll just literally compare it and make it match that color so that I know it's going to look as close to what's available as possible. But Dasha just posted in the chat a link to the blog for preventing color clashing in your designs, or you can go to teepublic.com/colors. Okay. Why don't we? Oh, thank you. Allison also posted that. Thank you, Allison. Why don't we move along to the next question that we got previously? It's about animated GIFs and just working with GIFs in Photoshop. So we're going to have our marketing designer, Lauren, answer that question. Just going to switch her to presenter. Let me know if that worked, Lauren. Can't hear you. Oh, something's happening. Make sure your mic's on, Lauren. Oh, wait, let me. Okay, I just turned it on for you. Let me know. Say something. Can't hear you. Sorry, guys. Stand by.
Can you hear me now?
No. Oh, there. Kind of heard you.
You can? Okay. But can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, great. So here I have opened a file that I want to animate to make it a little bit more dynamic and Halloween themed. So I have separated my model into two different slides. I called them in my layers. What's really important about making a GIF is making sure all your layers are super organized so that you don't get confused in which layers you want to turn on and off to animate it. So right now I have the first slide, and then I want her to change her expression so that it kind of looks like that. And in those groups, I highlighted it red, so I know that those are the ones I want to change. So basically, to get this timeline to show up at the bottom, you want to go to Window and select Timeline. So I just disappeared mine, but you want to check it. And it'll, actually, let me close this and show you what you would see when you open it for the first time. Oh, okay. So basically I selected there's two different versions you can do for this timeline. I selected the little thumbnail. So you can create a new layer, and that'll be the new kind of image that you turn on and off of your layers. So here I have the first picture and the second picture. What's really important to remember is whenever you change something in any of these kind of, let's see if I want to turn on Halloween here. So whenever you change something, it'll affect all of the layers. So it's really important to kind of keep track of what you want to, move around and be very intentional with that. So in this instance, say I want to move this pumpkin and this ghost and kind of have them maybe like up here, or I want to rotate the ghost when she is making a different face. So if I want the ghost to be in a different position, I would take the layer that I see here under my doodles group and duplicate it. And I would also duplicate the pumpkin if I want to move that guy too. And in this case, I'm going to make a new group. So I'll call them doodles 2. I'm going to delete these guys for now so that we can make them from scratch. So I want to change her expression. I want the doodles to move around, and I also want the text to flash and say Happy Halloween. So I'll create the second slide. I'm going to turn off the first group of doodles because in the second group, I want to change the position and make sure that you're on the slide that you want to see the animation happen. So I'm going to Command T and bring up my transforming box and just rotate the ghost a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing for the pumpkin. And I'm going to change her expression. And I'm going to change the text and turn on the layers I want there. So here you can see, and this is happening here because in the first screen in the first slide, I have Doodles 2 turned on. So I'll want to turn that group off. And then you'll see how it turned it off here. So I'm going to want to turn it back on here. So it's kind of a little bit of just feeling it as you go. That'll be kind of like the biggest difficulty, honestly, in making GIFs is learning which slides it affects. So I have my simple little animation here. And right now they're set for 1.5 seconds each. So if I press play, it'll, be 1.5 seconds per slide, which is just preference. You can change it by going down to these drop down arrows, and they have selected times here. You could do like 0.5 seconds. If you want to, let's say you have like a bunch of them, you could highlight all of them and change them to be the same pace. And then down here where it says forever, maybe yours doesn't say that, but it basically, when you save it out, it'll ask you how many times you want it to loop, basically. So there's an option for 3 times, and there's an option for once, which it just goes through once and then stops, or forever. I usually keep mine on forever because I want it to be a continuous loop. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with this at 1 second each. You can always press play and see how it'll look. So once you have what you're happy with, you save it out up here to go to File, Export. I'll always save it for web because usually that's how I want it displayed, and that is like a smaller, it kind of condenses it so that it's not as huge of a file. It knows that I want it as a GIF, but if sometimes it'll say JPEG or whatever your default was last time. So you just have to make sure it's switched to GIF. All of these settings I don't touch. I think usually it should save out as the best quality. Make sure the percent is at 100. And if there's ever an issue with, if you have a super big file, this file isn't going to be big because there's not that much going on. But if there ever is an issue with anything, you can change the diffusion. It's pretty much just messing around with all of the options here and figuring out, maybe if you choose less colors, it'll save, to an extent. This does look, not what I want, but messing around with how many colors and the diffusion and everything could help make it a smaller file. So here I'm going to save it out. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. Or here we go. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then on your desktop, I'm going to see what we have. So it'll basically just show up like that. Let me know if I missed anything or if anyone has any questions about what I just went over.
Thanks, Lauren. Anyone in the chat, if you have questions, go ahead and type them now. The next question we're going to take, though, is the one about how you make a design grungy or scratched. Chris is going to take that. So he can go ahead unless anyone else has questions about GIFs. Okay, no one is typing, so I'll take that as a no. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks.
Okay, going back to Chris. I don't see you yet. You're there, but there's no camera. Oh, there we go. Something's happening. Cool. Can't hear your mic, Chris. No. Let me try, I'm going to try making you a presenter again. Hold on. Can anyone hear Chris? I can't. Hmm. All right, stand by, guys. Hold on one second. I'm in troubleshoot. Both your camera and your mic are not on. Oh, sorry, guys. This is the first time something's happening with your, oh, there we go.
Is it working?
Yeah,
Can you
I
hear
don't
me?
know what happened, but yes.
All right. I switched to a different setting and then switched back, so I guess that worked. Can you still see my screen? Okay. All right, so I've opened my blank t-shirt design template, and I'm gonna drag in the same picture of Uhura from last time because it's open. So this is the design you've just made, and it looks good, but you want it to look more grungy or textured or vintage or whatever you like. So I'm just gonna change the background color real quick to navy t-shirt, just so that the thing shows up better. And there are online, you can download a bunch of textures that are designed for grunging up t-shirts or making them have a vintage look. I recommend ones that are just black and white, not various shades of gray, because that will lead to different levels of transparency, and you really want a solid like black and white cutoff in your texture, because that's how t-shirts disintegrate. They don't have like, they don't fade really, they sort of like crack, at least screen prints do. And plus it'll print better DTG, which is how we print our t-shirt designs. A solid black and white texture will print a lot better than one with a lot of varying gradients and opacities. So I'm just going to drag in this one that I usually start with. I'll put it on top of the design. So you can see how it's just black and white. And I get it to cover the design. And then I'll just select I'll uncheck contiguous and select the black portion. Then I'll hide this layer. And then I'll click this little mask button under the layers, which is the rectangle with the circle in it. And skip a step. Switch my layer to Uhura, then mask it. And see, that's pretty good. It's masking out all the non-black areas, so it has this kind of textured look to it. And then sometimes I'll take a brush and just add in a little extra texture, just so it's not totally from the template. So I'll just go, that's the wrong one. Where's my... Yeah, and these are spatter brushes. You can find these online too. DeviantArt has a lot of resources for stuff like this, and it'll create different spatter textures depending on how hard I press with my pen. So you can just like add a little bit, make it a little larger. You can see it adding a little bit more grain and texture to it. I don't know. You can use your artistic sensibilities to figure out what looks best to you and what's going to work for your specific design. But already this looks more like a design that you've had for 10 years and have washed repeatedly. I would also recommend against just changing the opacity of the layer. Like, this looks more faded, but it's also not going to print as well because of the change in opacity. Like if you go down here, suddenly the underbase, which is a layer of white that we print on t-shirts before printing the artwork, is going to show through, and it'll look vintage and grungy, but not in a good way that you want. It's just going to look bad. So I recommend sticking to like solid, like 100 or 0% opacities. And that's basically all I do for this particular exercise.
Cool. Any questions about what Chris just showed us? I see Rick typing. Chris, Rick was also asking about halftones. So I don't know if you want to set that up to show how we do halftones.
Yeah.
He also asked, if you were to export this as a large size for things like tapestries, how would that look as it's not a vector? That's why you want to start off making your images really big, especially if you want to print for tapestries, and especially if you want to make it grungier in Photoshop. Obviously, you said you work with Illustrator. Illustrator, you can create vectors, and you can also do grunge stuff on vectors as well. So if you're doing just a illustration that's like pretty solid, Illustrator is definitely the way you want to go for making really big stuff. But with Photoshop, you just got to start big. Start at 300 dpi, start at 5,000 pixels. Yeah, because in case for anyone that isn't familiar as much with Photoshop, Photoshop is not like Illustrator, where that when you have vectors, you can make it as big as you want. It can be the size of a billboard and it'll be perfectly crisp and clear. On Photoshop, if you were to take an image that you already had and made it bigger for a billboard, for example, it would get really pixelated and really blurry. So you want to always start big on Photoshop so that you don't have to resize it and make it blurry and pixelated. You can just start from being high res, basically. And Chris, you can start whenever you want for halftones.
Cool. I'll just share my screen again. All right, can you see my screen? All right, so this is a design that I did for How Did This Get Made? June, John, and Jason. I thought it would be a good candidate for halftoning because it's two colors and you can just kind of see the difference between the two different colors. So I'm going to combine all these layers using Command E, which is a really good little shortcut. And so you can see if I zoom in, we've got two slightly different shades of blue. But if I'm screen printing this, I want to just use one color because it'll be a lot cheaper to print one color than two colors in screen printing. So I figure for the darker shade of blue can be solid, and then the slightly lighter one can be half toned, showing the white t-shirt beneath it. So to do that, it's kind of a labor-intensive process here. I'll go to Image, Mode, Grayscale, which will, I'll flatten, which will desaturate it totally. Then I'll press Command L to open my levels and make sure that this darkest layer that I want to be completely solid is totally black. And usually the leftmost line in your levels window will be what you want to be black. So just bring the black to the right of that. And that's where it'll be. And you don't want to totally darken this, otherwise you'll lose all the half toning. So just lighten that up a bit. And okay. And then I'll go to Image Mode Bitmap. And don't change any of this. Don't change the output. Otherwise, it will change the dimensions of your artwork. And these are the presets that I usually use for a 300 dpi image. Frequency is 65 lines per inch. So with half toning, that'll be 65 dots per inch. And the angle you want to be kind of an irregular angle so that the dots don't form into like diamonds or other regular shapes that might distract from the half toning pattern. And I'll just keep the shape round. Okay. And now you'll see if I zoom in, got solid black lines and then a half-toned interior pattern because it was lighter than black. And then I'll go backwards through the whole process, grayscale, image mode, RGB. And then I will delete the white part by just magic wanding everything and deleting. And then I'll create a new background layer just so it's visible. All right, so now everything is half-toned, but it's still black. So you would just go into select the layer, go to Effects, Color Overlay, and I forgot to save the original navy color, but I can probably find it again. Close enough. So now you've got your half-toned design. It looks about the same as the original, but it's just one color. And that's how you half-tone. It's a little more complicated if you want to half-tone different colors together. It takes a lot of time and a lot of fine-tuning, but this is the basics of how you half-tone things, and then you can play around with that on your own.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Any questions about half toning? Would you do the same process for a halftone gradient?
Yep.
Yes. You didn't hear that.
Yeah, it's the same process. The dots just get smaller as the gradient gets lighter.
Any more questions about halftoning?
I do want to say one thing about halftoning for DTG printing. If the dots are really small, then you'll see a little bit of the underbase around them, and they'll lighten up because the underbase is white, and it'll kind of have the same effect as if you were just using a transparent gradient, and it won't print quite as well. So keep the dots pretty big if you're going to use halftones in DTG printing.
Okay, I don't see any more. Oh, would you set the size to inches and have it as the size of the shirt? Yes, right. That's what how you do it, Chris. When you're designing for a shirt.
The size of what to inches? The T design?
That's what I'm guessing, but is that what you mean, Rick? That you would set the size of the design you're creating to inches and have it the size of the T?
Yeah, I would set it to inches and have it be the size of the printable area of the shirt, not the whole shirt, just like a maximum 11 or 12 inches wide, and then between 14 and 17 inches long. But I usually keep it on the smaller side just because that's you're gonna decrease the size as you upload it anyway, just so it looks better.
All right. We have about a little less than 10 minutes left. So I'm going to do one more tutorial that was asked about and is consistently asked about on the site, which is how to remove backgrounds from your designs. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I was just saying that we have about 8 minutes left of the AMA. So I'm going to go ahead and do one last tutorial. It's for a question that was asked previously and is asked a lot on the site, which is how to remove backgrounds from your designs. And also, if you have any questions about anything we've gone over today or any questions at all in general, feel free to ask them. And we'll try to answer them before we end today. But if not, we'll try to get to them in our next AMA. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is a little watercolor bird that I pulled off the internet. I cannot take credit for it. I don't know who did it. I pulled it from Google Images. So just search bird watercolor on Google if you want it. Okay, so there once again, several techniques to remove a background. This is how I do it. I find that it works best when you have a fairly light background, or rather a contrasting background. So if this bird was like all white and the background was black, this would work as well. But what I do is I go to channels here on the right. It's not necessarily going to be right next to your layers, but if you can't find it, just go to window and channels. So then you'll see all the channels for RGB. If this is in CMYK, you'd see the 4 different CMYK color channels. So what I do is I try to find the one that is the darkest or the most even color. So basically the red channel looks okay, but the grays are a little white. The green, I think, looks a little better. Actually, let's go with red. Okay, so I take this red channel, click it, and drag to the new layer button down here at the bottom. And you're gonna create a new layer for just that red channel. The reason why you do that is because if you were to edit the actual red channel, like say you were to change the levels, it would change the color of the actual image. So you don't want to do that. You want to create a duplicate so you're not working on the original file. Then I'm going to click Command L and open up my levels. And what I want to do now is try to get the background as white as possible and try to get the main figure as black as possible. So I'll start with the black levels here at the end and go up. Now my background is turning grayer, so I'm going to take the white levels at the end and make them whiter. So that's getting pretty good. You can also mess with the midtones if you want, but as you can see, like more grays coming down here at the bottom, so I won't mess with that as much. Okay, so now we have this little bird who's mostly black and white in the center. So we want to make it all black. We basically want to create a silhouette of your image. So there's a few techniques to get this as black as possible. One is to take your burn tool. On the left-hand side, it's under your dodge. Just hold it down and click burn tool. Make sure the range is on shadows. The exposure I've set at 100, but you can set it at like 50 just to go slower. And I'm just gonna burn this layer and just get it darker. And that's taking all of the gray tones and making them like a lot darker. You can do the opposite with the gray that you want to remove. You can go to dodge and just dodge out these grayer tones here. Okay, so this is pretty good. We just want to fill in any of the white parts with black. So I'll just take a brush and I'll make sure that there's no feathering on the edges and also no spacing. So you can do that in your brush settings. Put it at 100% hardness, 1% spacing. And just go ahead and paint in the white areas. I'm usually a lot more careful with getting everything correct, but since we only have a few more minutes, I'll go a little faster. And now I'm noticing that there's still some gray over there, so I'm going to go back to my dodge tool and just make that whiter. You can do the same thing with taking your brush and making it white and then just painting that. Whoops. Okay, you get the idea. Once again, the purpose of this is just to make the background white and your central figure, whatever it is, black. You want to create a silhouette. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now what you do is you hold down Command and then click on your red copy. What that will do is it will select all of the white. So again, you click Command and then click the copy of whatever you were just working on. Then click your main layer at the top here. You're still in channels. Click RGB. It'll go back to its regular look. Go back to your layers. Make sure your original layer is selected. And then at the bottom, click the mask tool. That's, again, the rectangle with the little black dot in it. Okay, so now we've masked out the bird. That's obviously the opposite of what we want to do. That's just because the mask is on, it's the opposite. So you just want to invert this mask. There you go. Now I'll just put a background behind it so you can see what exactly we did. Voila, cute little bird. You still get some watercolor effect. You're not missing out on that. You still probably want to go in and perfect some of the lines and make sure there's no extra stuff out here. But that's how you do that. Any questions from the chat? Rick asks, would you then be able to use a halftone you made using inches per t-shirt at size of the t-shirt area for something larger like a tapestry, or would it look pixelated? Chris answered here. For a tapestry, you really don't need to halftone unless you want to for stylistic reasons, since the print process is different than our t-shirts. Yeah, so just for clarification, halftoning is mostly used for screen printing, which we don't do at TeePublic. We did it recently when we went to Comic-Con. We screen printed all the shirts we were selling there. But halftoning is a really cool look if you're working on different styles in your designs. But it also you can also use it for glows on things. So if you have something like, let's say I wanted to add a glow, outer glow to this little bird here. That is not going to print well at all. It's because, again, we put a white base layer under our designs before we print. So there's going to be a white base layer under all of that red, and it's just going to look like white pretty much, where it gets more transparent. So when you halftone something, it helps the DTG printing process as well, because it's only gonna, the under layer will only show up for those little dots of the design. Chris said earlier, though, you still want to make the halftone bigger than you normally would for screen printing, because otherwise you'll see that white base layer underneath. As Chris said, a high-res, higher PPI file will have less pixelation than the example we use. Well, it's 4:01, so that means our AMA is over. But thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll hopefully do this again with more specific design questions. Like maybe we'll just do one AMA that's all halftoning. I'm sure we'll see you there, Rick. But yeah, please feel free to ask us questions on the post I made in the TeePublic Artists Facebook if you have any more questions. And yeah, anything else from anyone, designers or community? All right, cool. Thanks, guys. Happy Halloween.